Hi everyone, I'm Raina Mehler, and I'm a director at Pace Gallery and also a curator and writer. And I've been at Pace for about 10 years, and I've always worked with our interdisciplinary artist collectives. And I'm director of media arts, so I oversee any artists that use like analog or digital technologies. So I got really into blockchain technology in like 2017, 2018 because I really thought it could revolutionize collection management, but also protect the artist's work. I would send, SD cards or like files on WeTransfer to be loaned around the world or sold. And how do you know if that file has been like replicated or archived or saved? And so I worked for years with legal teams and like, how do you create this ironclad agreement that's like universal around the world, can be enforced? So I talked at like museum conferences about smart contracts, and everyone was like, this will never work, never happen. And anyways, I got into like NFTs and curate NFT shows, and I've done shows in like AR, VR, and then in the metaverse. But I really love to do virtual environments that coincide with IRL, like presentations of it. So there's three shows up on the wall. Sasha has curated some amazing works by her and the Verse, which she'll talk about. And then two of the shows that I'm going to talk about are Retouched and Artists Who Code. And then I kind of highlight some prominent, women and non-binary artists in the space. This is a poetry workshop, and Sasha and I have like a really fun interactive poetry game at the end. But I'm not gonna go on and on about like the stark discrepancy of like women versus men, or like BIPOC communities, or non-binary. Like it's just, like in 2021, Grimes was like the highest selling female artist, and like collectively she sold like $8 million worth of work. And then you had Beeble like 6 months before selling one work for $69.9 million. And even just weeks ago, like Dimitri's sale at Christie's sold for like 6.1 million. So there's this, huge gap. And, there's other statistics, like art made by women sells for 50% less. And anyways, today I wanted to basically highlight artists. This is like, 30, 45 minutes. You cannot, talk about every single important person, but I want to talk about people that I'm very passionate about and that I think are significant voices in the space, like transforming art, having us see it in new, different ways. Using technology and how that's kind of shaping art, but also like our view on society. And then of course, just like homage to Guerrilla Girls, like one of the first to show. I don't know, just like the discrepancy of like how many men versus women artists are being shown, who's the muse, stuff like that. So I, also just wanted to briefly talk about like how do you like support these artists, like the different ways, because I think learning about the artist is great, but I think it's important to think about like how you can support them. And I think going to the artist shows, learning about them, talking to their gallerists or museum curators that show their work, listening to their panels. A lot of these artists are speaking globally at conferences, virtually, in the real world. So supporting them that way. If you see a grant opportunity or like exhibition, like just tweet at them. Like, I feel like the 21st century is just, you can like DM any artist now. So it's great. Like that's just like a good way to like connect with them too. And promote their work. Like retweet it, repost it. That's, I think, a big part of like the artist world today. That's like very different than it was like a decade ago. And of course, like if you have the ability, like collect it, or maybe recommend it to others that can do it as well. I also just wanted to list a few different like DAOs and communities that are very supportive of women and non-binary artists, BIPOC communities as well. So yeah, maybe just take a photo. I'm not gonna like go through them all, but yeah, they all are, you know, touch on like diversity and trying to have like an, you know, they collect these artists or they do events for them. And just these are good like resources to just see, you know, what everyone's doing. A lot of them have like weekly newsletters and stuff that you can check out. We got Superchief up here. And then just like, I mean, I kind of just wanted to like, as Sasha and I were kind of talking about this workshop, and even with Superchief, it kind of evolved to like being poetry focused, because I think a lot of like what you think about the NFTs maybe is like PFPs, right? Or like JPEGs. But actually I want to pause for a moment. Like, how many people own NFTs? Hell yeah. How many people like mint or make NFTs? Nice. Okay. How many people like are not so familiar with the space and couple? Okay, cool. If you guys have any questions along the way, just please, I'm like happy to create some definition. And like a DAO, for instance, is a decentralized autonomous organization where it's a group of members that basically pay to vote on different decisions that the organization does. And a lot of it's around like collecting too. But just like on a personal note, and I just was kind of divulging this with Sasha too, like growing up, I used to write fiction and do poetry and kind of like lost my way, you know, being in like a gallery, the art market. But artists like Sasha and Verse have actually inspired me to start doing it again. And poetry has been around for centuries. And actually, like in Greek and Roman times, you know, they had like the hierarchy of like the mediums, and poetry was before painting. And so it's, you know, words, the sounds, there's so many different like techniques, which like I'm sure you'll can explain better, but you know, from rhyming to wordplay, you know, it's really, I think, poetry is a repository of information where anyone can access in order to kind of understand the world. So just like anyone that isn't embarrassed, like how would you define poetry like in one word? Like what do you think of?
Freedom.
Love it.
Motion.
Yeah.
Music.
Love it. Yeah. Carrie, calling you out. Sorry.
I would say for me it is truth through simplicity and contrast.
Love that.
Going off the music comment and rhythm.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Universal.
Daniel, another one? No.
I was like, wait, that sounds nice.
I think it's all of that. And like another just, you know, poetry is words or sounds, but with visual content, you have words that go along with that, right? Like the artwork title, curatorial statement, and artwork text that explains it. And so, you know, is the title or text like integral to understanding the work? You know, throughout the decades, there's been different like theories or philosophies or like art critics kind of talking about this, like, and it is kind of controversial, right? I mean, some artists, their title of the work is like untitled number 34. Like, what does that mean, you know, or letters. Sometimes the title has like nothing absolutely to do with it. Sometimes it's very descriptive, like, or straightforward. But ultimately, the text and the title are part of like the viewer's participation in the artwork. So that's how I want to tie it to these shows I'm going to talk about. The first one is #Retouched. I co-curated this with Olive Allen. I'm gonna play this video, but I don't want the sound. Okay. Basically, so all around, she's tech entrepreneur, also an NFT artist. She really kind of blew up when she burned her Russian passport and turned it into an NFT and donated all the proceeds to Ukraine. And so we partnered with Kadaf to co-curate the first sale on Tezos. There's like amazing sound to some of these videos. But anyways, so it was right after like the Roe v. Wade docs were leaked. And so it's like, wow, once again, like the female body is being politicized, but it's not just the female body, it's trans bodies. It's like the social constructs or like gender, like how, you know, like how we define that, you know what I mean? So Retouch explores kind of this disparate meanings of the act of like physical touch. You know, when you touch someone, it can be like endearing and comforting and loving, but it can also be forceful and like demeaning and uncomfortable and like a form of harassment. But retouching, like also in 3D software, it's eliminating a perfection, like an imperfection. And a lot of times it has to do with bodies, you know, like women, like all, you know, or not women, just people in general all the time are like, yeah, like editing their bodies like for Instagram posts and stuff like that. And so, you know, we're kind of questioning like, who are we ameliorating like ourselves, like changing ourselves for? And then also in the title alludes to like going backwards, right? Like we're in the 21st century, but we're having like these same conversations from the century before. Like how can we, you know, basically create a safe environment that is inclusive, you know, for everyone in both the physical and the digital realms. And so the artworks that I'm going to go through, and I'm not really going to, I'm just going to talk about like a few of them. They're on view, and I'm happy like after to talk about them more in depth. But, you know, it's thinking about like how will humanity interact, touch, and be retouched in the future in both the physical and digital spaces, and how can we make this like a metaverse or the physical world actually better for like all marginalized communities and truly have like an equal society. I just wanted to shout out like exhibited art. Like also when I go through, I want to highlight like really important people are women and you know, LGBTQ people that have supported like these like typically marginalized groups, and Rondinia runs exhibited art, and for free she'll put your exhibition like up on her website. So she put Retouched up for this show. She also promoted it and shared. So I just like also want to just highlight like super incredible people that are have like these same kind of goals and missions that we're talking about today. So the next show I want to talk about is Artists Who Code, which I think is maybe one of like the first shows that really was like highlighting how there were so many artists in the space that were doing like generative art. Because typically in the beginning, like crypto natives, predominantly men, were more comfortable collecting generative and AI art. Like there's some statistics about that, and kind of because of they understood the terminology and process. And so this show, Artists Who Code, it's generative NFTs by women and non-binary artists. And it was showed at Bellum Gallery. It was in partnership with Artsy, so they had this online like auction component, and the proceeds were donated to Girls Who Code. It has different like styles and techniques ranging from AI and processing to interactive and time-based work. So those works are also on view. And then I just wanted to like define generative art, because it's kind of like an umbrella term. But I would love for like if people have other definitions, you know, like jump in. But basically, like at this moment, generative and AI art have really become like kind of the most predominantly collected art at the moment. And generative art is anything that has a code or a set of instructions that creates kind of endless variations by their outputs. And for Artists Who Code, curated by Miko Merpel, who's gonna like have her own slide because she's just amazing. Like correlated it to basket weavings, and I'd like never thought of that before. And then you can also think about like Sol LeWitt, who, you know, basically was creating mathematical formulas for a team of experts to execute, and that's just the equivalent of an algorithm. So she made me think about it like in different ways. There's really this long history of these different ways and creating different things, and also basket and weavings, like, you know, that's a craft, which like, again, like going back to this hierarchy, is like normally at the lower level of the list and predominantly done by like, you know, women in like, you know, ancient kind of times. You know, and NFTs can be like a live minting process. It can be experienced in your web browser. But it's like an ever-evolving artwork that's tied to the blockchain. And Artbox is probably the, you know, is kind of like the leading generative art platform for this. So yeah, this was just one of the artworks in this show that I just like really loved. It's so beautiful. And this artist is kind of going back to, again, basket weaving and like Afrofuturism to create these new generated NFTs. And then Itzel Yards, or so she just had, she's one of the honoraries at the new museum benefit this year with Rhizome, which was amazing. But I've 9 shells, IX shells. I've heard it like a million different ways at the new museum, which is really funny, and now I'm confused. But anyways, so this should be 1 of 1. Sorry, typo. So anyways, but I wanted to just like talk, like this is kind of a work that put her on the map. And it was a collaboration, but it sold on Foundation for 500 ETH, which was equivalent of $2 million at the time. So she, you know, it was just one of the kind of highest selling artists for a woman at the time. And this project also, a lot of the money went towards protecting human rights and privacy. So the Tor project supports like whistleblowers, and they you know, have supported like Edward Snowden, among others. This piece I also just really loved. Is it playing? Sorry, wait. Okay. So in this work, like in ancient Persian literature, the term was called moon-faced, and basically there were these like genderless, androgynous figures that like the Persian culture would paint, and now the reference kind of only connotes like beauty of women. And the artist talks about how like the modernization of Iran and the effect of like Western culture and European tradition of like realistic painting basically caused like the Persian art to shift from being like androgynous to like being like feminine or masculine. And so she's using basically like camera technology and AI model that generates like a series of videos from like these dynasties from like the 18th to 20th century to try to like bring back this like genderless portrait idea. And also I just love this idea of portraiture, right? Because it's also a very popular genre throughout our history that basically like, you know, in the Renaissance and even before, it conveyed someone's like social status. Like if you look at, you know, like the Dutch portraiture always cracks me up, you know, like the fur and the jewels and like reading the Bible and like, I don't know, but then there'll be like historical references of like them having orgies and stuff. So anyways, it's really funny. But I love, she's kind of like reclaiming portraiture, but also like harking back to like the original idea of like androgyny or ambivalence. And I just loved, and I also was just trying to show you like the different types of like generative works and NFTs that were in the show, or like artists that use code, basically. And so she's a data scientist, and she uses artificial intelligence to explore how human creativity and algorithms can collaborate together to create kind of these like speculative visuals that are like dreamlike or maybe nightmarish at some points too. But she really sees it as like a collaboration between like human and machine. And then I just have like such a soft spot for Sophia. And why did I all say 1 and 2? They're all 101. Sorry. So she's also like biology inspired, focusing on like organic life and again, artificial mechanisms to stimulate itself and how it evolves. And so just like nature evolves or like we evolve, like technology is evolving as well. And so her work brings into question the potential of AI and like the artistic practice and its ability to reshape our understanding of creativity. And on the side, she's also kind of concerned with the dynamic change in the role of artists working with machines and learning technologies as well. So Mika just really deserves her own slide for a minute. So I actually met Mika through Sasha like last year during NFT NYC. You organized an amazing dinner. She's based in LA. And I showed this work on the right, am I right? You're left. At a show I recently did at Loom Studios called Excavating Ex Machina. And right now you can see her work like on the out front screens in subways right now. But what like, I have a master's in art history and I did not know this story of Medusa, that Medusa was raped by the god Poseidon and turned into a monster by his wife, the god Athena. And that's when she became this like monstrous figure with snakes that no one could look at. And I don't know, maybe I learned it at some point and forgot. But anyways, it was very important for me to like hear that story again about how like people or how like myths are created throughout time, and how things are forgotten or left out. So for this like collection, and this was also like she was a painter, and basically created about 2,500 of these, and used code that would like randomize. There's different like portraits of like real Medusa sculptures, but then the colors. And what I thought was like so beautiful is she was explaining that she would have never made these color choices, but like at the end, like the 2,500 of these represent like all the different facets or like emotions that we feel. And so for her, code was like allowing her to take her creativity to a next level, but also discover like parts of herself that she didn't really realize. And then, yeah, a quote that I have from her is that she said, "I was able to let go of parts of myself that required perfection and planning." Because obviously when you're using code, and you really, for some of them, you don't know what it looks like till you go to mint it, right? So there's this idea of spontaneity or chance, or like you don't know exactly how it will turn out. So she says, and this is a realization that so profoundly changed my relationship to the art and the larger world, that technology can expand our corporeal sense of self, that it can make us more, not less human. And I just think that's such like a beautiful statement. Also, she like if you haven't seen this like video, like you gotta watch it. During the workday at Pace, like turned it on, and like halfway through, I had like the executive vice president in watching this, and she's just basically, it's a webinar about like art and Beanie Babies and NFTs, which like I had a million. My platypus Beanie Baby was like my favorite growing up. But so like, and she wanted to share research about these two kind of bubbles, right? Because Beanie Babies were like this fad. Some people say NFTs are a fad. And so she wanted to talk about, key contributions by women that are often overlooked when speculative frenzies are reduced to fads instead of being seen as like harborers of new era of technology. So it's basically tackles the confluence of technology, the trend and the human desire to collect and create meaning and community as well. Operator, did I spell that right? Guys, wow. No more typos. So Anya and Deja are, yeah, they're so amazing. I like met them on a panel in like Art Basel in like 2016 and just like kept in touch. And, you know, they're like award-winning experiential artists. They've, you know, create this installations. They're a duo. Anya, her background is like choreography. And so they're like this kind of like queer power couple that just had this like amazing drop on art blocks. And it was like over a year of basically Anya like choreographing different like moves and positions and like using you know, different tracking methods to create these like abstract forms. And again, it was like generative, and you know, you don't know exactly what you see at the time of the mint, so you can go on art blocks to see like the full collection, but it like sold out in 30 minutes. They got so much press, and just I'm so happy for them because they're so smart and just definitely like and just like cool and chill, like you like want to get drinks all night with them, you know. And then I just wanted to show this work, Line Scanner, which so it's a older piece, couple from I think 2019, and I showed it in the show Excavating Ex Machina, which was like in April at Loom Studios, where Clay works, and also Subjective Art, so shout out to them. And this was the first time like they got to do this work as like a blown up projection room. So I just want to play a short video of it. I gotta make sure the sound's on for this.
Yeah. Okay. Awesome. Thank you.
We were modeling for it.
Yep.
But it was so like impactful and awesome. And I think just like the point that I wanted to like, hope I don't embarrass you, no. Just like also like we're talking about like poetry and text and visuals, but movement and gesture, like that's also like so important to art, especially like performance art as well. Sorry, Carrie, but you like bridge both these worlds. Carrie Abel right here. So multidisciplinary artist, thought leader, metaverse pioneer. She did this like incredible VR show that was up during like the Biennale in Venice this past year. You've done this generative music project. You're working with like people that like invented the GBL file, and you just signed a record label deal as well. Also, so like a poet, art, just fucking doing everything. Sorry, can I not swear? But I could have found a better video. But also at the show Excavating Ex Machina, we basically, she sent me like 1,000 VR stills, by the way, to go through. No, I know. No, but it was really cool. And yeah, so we like put like the VR stills on like the different walls, and then you did like a 15-minute performance also with dancers. So I just have like a very short clip from like my iPhone. Sometimes I want to share you. And I just like to compare you like Lou Reed meets Fiona Apple, but you know. Anyways, okay, I feel like I'm running out of time, but I'm gonna wrap it up really quick. And then just like Una and Sam J, they did this, their first, Una, she's like an anonymous conceptual artist. She wears this mask and sunglasses to conceal her identity. Sam J, On the other hand, really focuses on self-expression, navigating social boundaries and labels. And this was like their first collaboration performance. And yeah, I just published an article in White Hot about it. So if you're into it, just read it. But yeah, it just was about basically they wore these red dresses throughout the conference, which like in the article, I'm wondering like if I'll get shit for this, but it like obviously stood out from like the tech bro like attire or whatever. And so it sparked like conversations. Like people would be like, "What are you wearing? Like, what's in the briefcase?" Like Una was handcuffed to this transparent briefcase with like a smart contract code, and so it focuses on like gender identity and social constructs and collective behavior because people would like only talk to certain ones of them, but also like people would start being like, "Can I take your mask off?" And like it also reminded me of like Yoko Ono's performance, like Cut Piece, where she was like invited people to like cut parts of her fabric off, and then they'd start getting like aggressive, to reveal like more of her body and like bra straps and stuff. And so, anyways, basically, I think like it's pointing to like this, like blockchain basically is like, okay, it's inclusive, it's accessible, it's for everyone, right? Like that's how it's been touted. But like it's a whole language and world, and it's really only been for a certain type of community. But this work is like, shedding light on that, but also showing that we have confidence in this system, that like we can turn this around and create and really make it, more equitable, have equality in the space. And that's why I think the performance piece is so kind of important, because it shows, the optimism, which I think we all have. Anna Marie Cabela, she's, part of Verse. She just had a book launch for one of her poetry. This was also in the show I just curated. I think it's up on the wall somewhere. But she's part of Verse. I don't know, Sasha, if you're gonna talk about her.
In terms of children.
So I don't want to steal your thunder. But anyways, what I really love, or why I felt like it was important for her piece to be in this show, because basically the theme was thinking about like, okay, in like thousands of years, when sentient beings like unearth this show, like how we excavate like Egyptian artifacts, like what will they think about society? And this is, it's called Fathomless, and it's based on like her experience, something that happened with her son. And I thought of, just this like kind of like rawness and like the reality of motherhood and things that are scary that I think aren't talked about like enough. And was just really thought it was important to be in the show. So leading, kind of going through to poetry, Sasha, I'm very lucky to have two of her works, and I just wanted to show you because you saw how Anna's, it's like a poetry. She has this very nice rhythm. Like when you look at it, you can read each line. There's so many different ways that you can make poetry NFTs, and I'm sure you're going to talk about this. Oh, it didn't work. It's not going. That's what it's doing. Anyways, thank you.
Well, first of all, Raina, that was really brilliant and beautiful and a really powerful walk through some of the really inspiring artists who are in the space. And you are such an inspiration. You are such a force in Web3, and I'm so honored to be co-presenting this workshop with you. And yes, sing your praises. Yeah, and thank you guys all for coming again. I'm going to, I think, start with just a little bit of an introduction, and I want to talk a bit about my practice and just kind of give a little bit of grounding in what I do. And then I want to get into some examples. And then Raina and I thought we could end the night by doing a little bit of an interactive poetry workshop together, which I hope is of interest to some of you. But I know a lot of you, but are there any poets in the house? From the folks that I don't know? Hi, it's good to see you. That's awesome. And you have or you haven't minted poetry NFTs? Not yet. Are you interested in it? Maybe? Yeah? And what about you? Yeah? Okay, awesome. Well, we're going to get into it. So I'll speed through the beginning, but I do just want to give a quick intro. So my name is Sasha. I'm a writer. I'm a poet, first and foremost. I'm also a language artist, and I'm an AI researcher as well, which is a kind of a strange group of things to be. But first and foremost, like I said, I'm a writer. I've been writing since I was tiny. I grew up in a house full of books, and even though it's a little funny now because I do so much work on the blockchain and with AI, I really, at heart, I think I'm an analog poet in lots of ways. I grew up publishing, in literary journals like this and writing in longhand and making lots of physical book sculptures and things like that. And so that's really important to me. And I wanted to kind of show that to ground like the work that I'm doing now in Web3 and the work that so many writers in Web3 are doing is, coming from a long established practice off the blockchain as well. So I kind of want to make that point at the beginning. I've also always been just obsessed with text-based art. When I was little and would go to museums, these were the kinds of things that I always gravitated towards. So you probably all recognize a lot of these, but folks like Jenny Holzer and Louise Bourgeois and Bruce Nauman and Ed Ruscha, and the list goes on and on. But I think I've always been really, really interested in the idea that words don't just have to exist, inside the covers of a book, and they don't just have to be on, a one-dimensional piece of paper. You can, bring them to life on buildings. You can put them in neon. You can really imagine them in so many different ways and shapes and forms. And why I think that's important is because, just like with art, the haptics of this, the materials of it, the colors and the size and the font and all the visual and aesthetic elements of language have such an important impact on how a poem or how a text is received. And I think that even though a lot of these artists are not considered poets, they're considered visual artists, they are doing things that are very poetic and that really blur the line between poetry and visual art. So this is a huge source of inspiration for me as well. And then I've also always been really interested in technology and in science and engineering. And again, sort of grew up really obsessed with space exploration and computers and technology. And I think like many of us here, kind of grew up in this weird zone where we went from, not having smartphones to having smartphones and being online all the time. And that's always kind of in my brain and in my work is this relationship that we have with our devices that is really fundamentally changing what it means to be human. This is a photo of me with my friend Bina48. She is a humanoid AI robot who was built in 2010 by Hanson Robotics. And I've been working with her as her poetry mentor since 2018, basically getting my hands into her mind file and looking at all the data points that she's got in there and kind of figuring out how she puts thoughts together, how an AI-powered being like her is able to use neural networks to combine ideas and create new thoughts. So this has been a really interesting sort of conceptual poetry project, but really kind of brings a lot of my different loves together. So there's a kind of, conceptual poetry aspect, there's the tech aspect, and then there's an element of the artistic in here as well. Bina has actually done some work with Stephanie Dinkins, who Clay knows, right? And actually has quite an interesting sort of track record of appearances in museums as well. So it's kind of a cool crossover. So I just really quickly wanted to show again, one of the reasons why I came to the blockchain and why I think so many poets have come to the blockchain, so many writers, is because a lot of my work didn't quite fit into the traditional definition of what a poet should be. And even though I said before, and I showed you that photo of literary journals that I've published in, a lot of my work looks like this. On the left, there are physical canvases of code poetry from my Ancient Binary series. We have in the cases there are sheets and stacks of AI-generated poetry that I've printed out and kind of put into library drawers. And then on the right, just examples, my Instagram that goes back years and years of text blocks that are animated that use motion graphics and movement and sound and all sorts of multimedia, multi-dimensional elements to bring text to life. And these are things that I really have always enjoyed doing and kind of felt like that was where my voice wanted to take me, like that's where my experiments were leading me. But I couldn't publish, these little MP4s in the Kenyon Review. I can't like take one of these canvases and submit it to the New Yorker. So I really found myself kind of at odds trying to figure out what to do with these poems. And I found myself really struggling with whether or not I was an artist or whether I was a poet. And I think that what's been so exciting about Web3 is that there's a space kind of right in the middle of those things where all these interests and disciplines kind of come together, which, I'll talk more about all the works on the wall and the folks in this room who are responsible for a lot of these beautiful pieces, but there's a really beautiful confluence of media and technology and art and language that I think really gives so much depth and breadth to the idea of what poetry is, and it's made possible by new media and by the blockchain. You guys, many of you know this, but a lot of these interests of mine have come together in a project called Technology, which basically is a catch-all term. It's a fusion of the word technology and elegy. So I'm playing here with the idea of technology as being really exciting and forward-facing and kind of pushing us into this new future. And on the other hand, the idea of the poetic elegy as really occupying a very melancholic space and kind of lamenting the things that we lose as a result of all these technological advances. So the project is really about what it means to be human at this moment when so much of what we take for granted about the human condition is completely changing. Digital immortality, artificial wombs, techno-spirituality, cryogenics, blockchain, Web3, all these things are really radically changing so much of what it means to be a human being. And so that's kind of what I love to explore in my work and what really I think has drawn me to the blockchain in particular. And the reason why is because this project is really, it's really kind of a poetry ecosystem, not a book, not just a hardcover book. The book itself is a bit of a hybrid. It's a hybrid in that it's written partly by me and partly by a machine. And I'll get into that in a bit. And it's partly poetry and partly art, and all these things come together. It's also sound. There's a sound component to it as well. And a lot of the pieces in this book have come to life on the blockchain. I've been able to publish them and manifest them in the way that I really intended to do by bringing these texts and bringing these ideas into Web3. So here's one example, and I'm going to get into like some concrete examples for anyone who's interested, both from my work and then also from the work of various writers in the community. But here's an example, and on the left is a poem from my book called Completion, Are You Ready for the Future? And it's a poem that's written with AI, with an AI text generator that I actually custom trained on my own writing. And it's a system that I've sort of been working on and evolving for many years now. And that piece was sort of this discrete version of the poem that I finished in like 2019, put in the book, was published in 2021. And then instead of just kind of letting it languish there, I realized that I could kind of bring it to life. And I turned it into this multimedia piece that's been on view in various galleries and has traveled around the world. And that actually keeps evolving in real time. I've kind of continued to write the poem and kind of put it out into the world in different forms. And so to me, this is, an exciting sort of example of how a poem doesn't have to just be done you don't have to put it between the covers of the book and put it back on the shelf. It can actually keep living and keep growing. So how many of you have used ChatGPT? Okay, like a lot of people actually. Okay, so for those who may not, and just kind of as a little bit of a refresher, so ChatGPT is basically like built on this large language model, right? This AI-powered large language model that is basically built to write like a human. And the way that it does that is basically by ingesting tons of examples of written language and then using, using neural networks to parse all that language and make its best assumptions about how to write, how to put words together, how to draw associations between different points. And this is what powers GPT-4, and this is what I became really, really interested in back in 2018 when GPT-2, which is now like the distant ancestor of GPT-4, when GPT-2 came out, and it was billed as basically a text generator, a predictive text generator, where you could enter a prompt and literally just press a button and it would continue writing, it would continue the thought, or it would answer the question. So it was like a very rudimentary version of what we're using now with ChatGPT. But when I stumbled on it, I got really excited because, you know, as a poet, as someone who works with language and who's just obsessed with putting words together, the idea that there was this machinic way to create human language or humanesque language, and that it had all these very poetic overtones as well, and it had all these conceptual it had all these conceptual references to, like, you know, creativity and inspiration, and kind of mirrored back to me the process of writing. I got super excited by it and just kind of started learning everything I could about GPT-2 and natural language processing. And when I started, because like I said, I'm a poet from way back. I'm not a computer science person in the beginning. So when I started, I was using an off-the-shelf version of GPT-2, and it was super easy to use. It was no code. And I started and kind of realized it was really interesting, but it was very generic and it wasn't exactly what I wanted to do. So I started learning and teaching myself how to put together a training data set that would actually give it more precise information about how I wanted it to write, and giving it cues about, you know, my vocabulary, my stylistic influences, you know, the poems and the poets who've been really important to me. So compiling all this information into a training data set and then uploading it to the core model, so that it basically is, it's kind of like the core model is a baseline understanding of human syntax and grammar. And then the layer of like my curation and my training data is like a one-on-one poetry workshop where I'm teaching it what I think about poetry and how I want it to write. So that's the system that I've been using to write things, you know, since 2018. So these are just some examples of how, for me, it's been possible to use new media to take poems out of the usual places and like put them on the sides of buildings or into an art fair, or, you know, take them in unexpected directions in public art campaigns and things like that. Again, things that are not necessarily possible with a traditional understanding of poetry, but you know, using technology, using new media, it's possible to take these things in lots of cool directions. So these are a couple examples of poems that I would not have been able to write if it were not for the blockchain and if it were not for AI. So on the left, you can kind of see at the bottom, there's a guy standing in front of a screen. And this is a piece that is actually an interactive poem where the movement of the visitor, the guest, the reader in front of the screen is being read by a webcam, and then is actually enabling that person to write the poem. They're kind of scrolling through options and discovering phrases and changing the colors and changing kind of the appearance of the poem. And actually they get to choose when it's their desired combination and their choice of words. They can freeze frame and then actually mint their poem on the blockchain. So they're literally writing a poem into existence with their body, which again is not something that I would ever have thought to do before coming to Web3. And like, this is the kind of stuff that I find so cool, is using the blockchain kind of as a printing press. And then on the right side is just a little snap from a long poem cycle that I wrote with my AI co-author. So this is AI generated text, and it's part of like a 30-minute media-rich poem cycle that it combines spoken word and music and animations, and almost becomes like a little bit of an operetta or something. But being able to actually take this again out of the book and put it into places like a museum in Rome, where it is right now, has been a really cool way of getting to talk about poetry with people who wouldn't normally be reading this, you know, in the book itself. So that's been really cool as well. This is a quick example of another kind of poetry that I wouldn't be able to write without these digital technologies. So these are actually generative poems that are coded in P5.js. And these images are made of words. They're made of AI generated words. And then I've kind of created a code that repeats them over and over and over again and kind of builds up into this visual poem basically that almost elides the words themselves and becomes just kind of a color field, and kind of really leans into the idea that so much of poetry is not actually about the words themselves, is not actually about the language, it's about the feeling that's evoked and the space between words and kind of the ephemeral things that you can't necessarily touch through the words themselves. And so this is a way of using technology to, again, kind of get at that place that we can't always access through intentional human language. And then this one will look familiar to Clay and Carrie and Raina, but and Elizabeth. But this is just a little snapshot from a performance of my Art Blocks curated project with Nathaniel Stern, which is called Still Moving, and it's an AI-generated poem that is actually an embodied interactive poem. It was the first of its kind published on Art Blocks, and basically enables a reader to mint their own poem and then interact with it in perpetuity and create their own understanding, their own interaction with the text in real time. And we partnered with Clay and with Loom and Subjective to put on a performance of this poem in space with an amazing dancer named Camellia, who interacted with a webcam in order to make the poem come to life in the space in real time. So it's a really unique performance that I think, again, kind of shows how technology can really take poems into very unexpected places. And being able to work with a generative engine like Art Blocks to do this is also a really kind of cool and unexpected direction. I think for me, being able to produce, a collection of several hundred editions the way you can on Art Blocks is akin to writing a book. It doesn't necessarily look like a poetry book the way we might think, but each one of these mints to me was a kind of a page that was being written into existence by the minters. And so this was a really fun project to get to work on. I'm going to skip past that, and I want to talk, I don't know how much time we have, but okay. I want to talk a bit about the wider Web3 community. So like I said, I came to the blockchain because I'm a poet who likes to think about technology and write with technology, and this is really where I felt I'd be able to do that. And when I started minting, when I really kind of came over into Web3 and started investigating what was going on here for writers, it was because I was inspired by artists. I'd seen a lot of crypto artists who are doing really cool things and minting their work, and I thought, well, this kind of makes sense for me because similar to the things that I'm doing, I'm already kind of in the new media zone. But when I really kind of dug into it, and this was the end of maybe 2020, there were not very many writers working in this space at all. And there were no writing platforms really to speak of. There were, definitely a number of marketplaces for visual art. And there were a lot of, folks in that world who were very, very active. But it seemed like it was a very kind of wild and lonely place for writers like me. So a couple places that really kind of became home and really have sort of influenced the growth of the Web3 writing community over time. One is Hic et Nunc, and I don't know if anyone here was familiar with Hic et Nunc in those early Tezos days. But Hic et Nunc was a really amazing place for writers to congregate because it was a really experimental community. It was a place where it was actually quite cheap to publish. So it was actually a good place for writers to really do a lot of drafting and experimentation. And for that reason, there were a lot of writers who were drawn to Hic et Nunc. And that's actually where I met a lot of the folks who've really become pillars of the Web3 writing community. I first met one of my co-founders of the Verse, Callan Iwamoto on Hikitnunk, R.S. Vetier, who's an amazing poet who does a lot of work with AI, Pierre Gervois, who's another member of the Verse, and so on. But a lot of really interesting conceptual experiments were happening there in the early days. So I always like to name check Hikitnunk and encourage people to kind of go back and dig through the archives, because there's some really cool literary experiments kind of hidden in those early pieces. And the Crypto Writers Discord. So Callan, who I just mentioned, before we all ended up getting together to found the Verse, she actually founded something called the Crypto Writers community. And she was one of the first people that I saw really doing interesting conceptual experiments with literature in Web3. And by conceptual, I mean she would actually take blockchain technology and weave it into her writing and make it a medium for her work. She would take, a seed phrase from a wallet and build a whole storytelling narrative around it, and was doing some really, really wild and cool things. And kind of drew towards her a lot of folks who are interested in narrative and the future of storytelling and the potential for language to leap off the page. So she founded the Crypto Writers Discord, which became a really important hub for a lot of us in the community, and still is going, and they have a Discord. So if anyone's interested, that's a really good place to go. Then in, I think it was maybe July of 2021, Callan and I and a few others, including our third Verse co-founder, all ended up together in a project called Ether Poems, which is often billed as the first on-chain poetry project on Ethereum. And it was a group of poets who had really different styles and really different approaches. And we were just all kind of wanting to band together and create something where we could say this is a place for writers to work as well as artists. And that really was a big moment for a lot of us. It was the first kind of major initiative that brought a lot of poets together in one place, and that kind of showed the potential of the blockchain as a place for publication and for distribution. And as I said, that's where Callan and I met Anna, who became our third co-founder of the Verse. So that was a really important project for a lot of us. And then the fourth thing I want to mention as a really important resource for the community is a magazine, a zine called The Tickle. And The Tickle is an incredible arts and culture zine that really prioritizes writing and criticism and poetry and lots of areas of the arts that are a little bit underexplored in other platforms and in other places in Web3. And they've been going for at least a few years now. And I think they're a really fantastic resource, so I want to recommend them to anyone who's not familiar. They're also really cheap to support and purchase, and there's tons of great content. So that's, I think, a really important one for anyone who's interested in writing in Web3. All of which brings me to the Verse, which many of you here know. So our community manager, Elizabeth Sweet, is here. Our art advisor, Giselle Flores, is here. The Verse, for those who may not know, is an NFT poetry gallery. Basically, we believe that poems are works of art and that poems deserve to be in this space just as much as any other art form. And we've been really working hard since our launch at the end of 2021 to onboard writers into the Web3 space across chain. And we work very closely with lots of different galleries and curators and art experts, including Raina and Superchief and lots of other really important members of the ecosystem, to lift up poetry and really let collectors know, let artists know, let readers and editors and publishers know that NFTs aren't just about PFPs and JPEGs and all that. They're actually a place for literature and for publication. So I'll run through this quickly, but and if anybody has more questions about the Verse, especially those who might be newer to minting NFTs, and if you want to chat more about about any of these specifics, let me know, or you can talk to Elizabeth after. But basically, we like to say that at the Verseverse, we are focused on kind of three big things. And one is celebrating the rise of crypto-native poetry, as well as really onboarding legendary writers outside the ecosystem, bringing them into the space. So really just trying to make this a place for writers to exist and thrive. We are really focused on blockchain as a way to empower writers, and I mean empower both in the sense of financial empowerment, being able to actually buy and sell and transact poems, which for a lot of reasons is a very new and innovative thing to do, but also empowering writers creatively. So like I was saying before, there's a lot of ways you can write in Web3 and write with new digital tools that are not possible in any other ways. So we really like to really kind of shed light on the creative potential of Web3 and really help onboard writers by equipping them with the tools they might need to get started, like AI tools, for example. And then we also, like I said before, we do a lot of programming and a lot of partnerships. And I should mention, we have a lot going on right now, including a summer anthology. We have an exhibition on in Paris. We've always got things cooking. So a good place to kind of stay in tune with what we've got going on is to follow the Verseverse on Twitter @theverseverse. And we are always putting out, Elizabeth is always putting out lots of information and little poetic tidbits. And then just a little snapshot at our curatorial framework. So we have 3 areas that we really focus in on. And I'll kind of point out examples of these 3 areas. So one is language art. And this is kind of an age-old idea, the idea that words and images go hand in hand, right? That goes back to the earliest days of language and the evolution of letters from pictures. And of course, illustrators have been adorning manuscripts for thousands of years. So what we're interested in doing is really kind of moving that forward and trying to broker new kinds of collaborations between not just crypto-native artists and poets, but also between creative technologists and coders and all sorts of folks who can help writers manifest their work in lots of different ways. And then the second area we focus on is crypto conceptualism, which, as I said before, is really about using blockchain as a medium. So not just kind of writing something and then publishing it on a blockchain, but actually using smart contracts, using blockchain protocol, using seed phrases and wallets, using all the things that enable us to mint NFTs, using those as blank paper or a pen. So that's been a really exciting area as well. And then the third is the area that's really near and dear to my heart, which is algorithmic authorship. And this is really an experimental zone where we invite authors to start using AI tools if they haven't before. And it's been a really important thing for us because there's a lot of resistance still to using AI tools in the writing community. I think we know well that there's a lot of resistance to that in the creative AI community in general. So really using our space at the Verseverse to kind of show what's possible as a result of collaborating and co-authoring text with the machine, kind of showing that it's not, it's not a cheat, it's not lazy, it's not plagiarizing. It's actually a new way to think about poetry and language, and it's a new way to create language as a raw material. So that's been really exciting as well. And I'm very proud to say the Verseverse has really been advancing AI and generative text since we launched at the end of 2021. So like long before things started cooking with GPT-4. So here's just a couple of examples, and you can see there's examples on the wall here as well, but lots of really beautiful work that showcases the depth and breadth and the possibilities of language in not just on Web3, but language when it's married together with new media and technology. So I won't necessarily go through everything, but I do want to point out quickly. So Elizabeth has some beautiful work right here from a series called Glimmers of Gratitude. And I don't know if you want to say anything about it quickly, but please do.
Sure. So it's a haiku series. I like to work in series and give myself like a time bound kind of like progressive mission.
when it comes to producing work. And so I did one haiku a day for 30 days and paired it with some art. And the way that I write, the text and the image kind of come together at the same time. Sometimes one with the other, but like they really inform each other in the way that the words look on the page or the colors. And in this time, I was empowered or inspired, I guess, to start this series because I had just come up on a year of the first verse and was really just, I don't know, feeling really grateful. So I was like, let's just make this into a series. Let's make haikus are easy, 17 syllables. How hard could it be? And 6 days in, a family friend died. And it was one of the hardest times. It like sparked things in my life and just things from my past. And it was one of the hardest times to really feel gratitude. But I had posted that I was going to do this, and then so I was like, for my 300 followers. But no, because I said I would do it, and I did it, and it was one of the most important experiences for me, just forcing myself to use poetry as a way to express what I was feeling, but then also to track what I wanted to feel, what I wanted to share with the world. So, which was gratitude. So that's the series. So there were 31, and some of them are dark. Don't get me wrong. But anyway, so then I minted them all as one-of-ones on Object for like 5 days each. And Sasha's like, 2 today, which is really nice. I think like one in the beginning.
Yeah.
This was really nice. But yeah, it's a way for, you can mint a one-of-one that you price at an ETH or 2 or however much, or you can mint something and sell it for $1 or $2. It's just how you want your work out in the world, and whoever buys it, collects it, shares it, it connects with it in a way that you wouldn't otherwise. I think that to me is what's really special about what the first verse does, and kind of what all the crypto poets are doing, which is expressing themselves. People dig it. So, if you have any questions about minting or anything, let me know.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. So I think a couple things that you exemplify really well here. One is that these are haiku, they're very simple, and you can see the sumptuousness of these visuals is really appealing and really arresting. And I think this is a really great example of how you can take a simple bit of language and marry it with imagery and really find a whole new audience for your work and find a whole new way to share your writing. So I really love the series. I love the visuals, and I love how they really bring the words to life in different ways, and also that juxtaposition of the emotional content with the juiciness of the visuals is great. But which actually brings me to a good point, which is that a lot of time, I think when writers are coming into Web3, and I don't know if you guys feel this way or not, but one of the biggest hurdles is the question of, or one of the biggest perceived hurdles is the question of how do I turn a poem into an NFT? And there's kind of this perception that you have to be very artistic and you have to be very good with creating visuals and turning it into an art piece. And this is an example of where Elizabeth happens to be a great artist and a great poet, but I also want to point out a couple of examples of pieces where it's very stark and very kind of text-driven. So this next piece here is by Aurea Harvey, who's an incredible crypto net artist from way back and now crypto artist. And this is actually a piece that she wrote with AI as an experiment. It's very different than a lot of her work, but she, obviously you can see there's an illustration there, but it's presented as an actual poem. It's presented as a traditional kind of text. And I think it really still works very well. So you can see there's lots of different ways to approach this. The next piece, Giselle, I'm so sorry that this is a snippet of your piece and not the correct orientation, but this is a beautiful little window into a piece by Giselle called Text in Time. Do you want to speak really quickly about your piece?
Yeah, this is a zoomed in. You can see the grits and the detail. This is a photograph. It's part of the inaugural Spaces of the Verse. It's a very different piece than the others, where I'm also working generatively with my camera, shooting physically generative. I dance with my camera in Spaces. 2018 is when I started learning how to find the space between the shutter. Is something I was obsessed with. And this is right around the time I started learning about
Web3 also, and 2019 I started minting. Big collection that's ongoing is kind of like, was just a huge aha moment for me. I had been shooting commercially for 20 years before doing this. And that moment of between the shutter, this is taken in Times Square. And it's one of the only transmissions of light that is text-based. And it's called Text in Time. Basically highlighting how important it is to bring text in this moment, in this era, where our phones have literally changed our lives, and we are texting in time at all times, at any moment, in any time in our lives, whether, you know, in a room or in the bathroom or with anybody, you know, it's like, there's like constant connection going on, and you know, question like how far do we want to fall in that? Like how far are we going to experience our lives through our phone? And I feel like a lot of that comes with this piece for me. And I've always been obsessed with you know, the macro and the micro, so this kind of giving you a micro into like a macro perspective. When I shoot these transmissions of lights, it's always about the atmosphere around going into one point, like, which is me, my camera.
Yeah.
Capturing the energy around and bringing it into one.
And then kind of a contrast to that, but like a nice, it kind of is a nice like juxtaposition in terms of colors, but the piece right to the left of Giselle's is a collaboration. It's a 10-part poem called The Beginning is Feminine. And it's a poem by a poet named Tina Chang, who's actually my manuscript advisor. And she's a very traditional poet. She's an amazing poet, but she's also someone who's published a lot of physical books and doesn't really know much about the blockchain, but is very interested. And she was really excited to lend her words to an artist to interpret. So this is a collaboration with the artist Emily Edelman, who is an incredible artist who does a lot of work with typography, letter forms, and she created this really beautiful visual language that accompanies lines from the poem. So that was, I think, a really exciting thing to see that come to life as well. To the left of that, there's a great poem by Johnny Dean Mann, who's the editor-in-chief of The Tickle. And to the left of that, I want to talk about that piece, that black and white piece there for just a second, but that is a piece by a very special poet named Versa. And Versa is actually an emergent AI poet. It's the collective voice of the verse. So just really quickly, Versa is basically a synthesis of all the writers who are currently contributing to the verse and have contributed since our launch. And what we've done is we have put all of our poems, all the texts of our poems, into one training data set, so very similar to what I did with technology in the beginning. And we're working with a friend of mine, an amazing coder and poet named Ross Goodwin. And we've all kind of worked together to shape that training data set so that we can enter keywords and then ask this generator to produce its own poems in a very autonomous way. So all of these are completely machine generated. We have not edited any of the texts in here. And all the poems in the Versa series are generated from a set of 10 keywords that are selected, depending on the context, selected by the members of the verse, or by an audience, or by a reader, by request. So this is a really cool series that we've been working on since last year. And we just actually debuted this particular set on our website at theverseverse.com. But I love this series. It's like a really important one for all of us. And then before we do our little demo to close things out, I just wanted to mention Rattle magazine and the special NFT tribute issue, which I brought copies of actually for everybody. But Rattle is a really fantastic literary journal that some of you might know. It's very widely read and very popular, but they're also quite traditional in some senses. They're a print journal that has an online component. But this past month, they became, to my knowledge, the first literary journal to actually devote a whole section of the magazine to poem NFTs. So that was a really big moment, I think, for the writing community. And there are a lot of poems and poets from the verse and from the Web3 community that are represented in this issue, which is great to see. And this issue also contains a very long interview with me about my practice working with AI. So again, I'm going to give everyone a copy. And if you want to read about that at length, it's like a really long interview. You can read it later. But this was a really cool moment, again, that really shows, I think, that there are the seeds of bridges being built between the traditional publishing community and what's happening in Web3. So kind of a good sign of things to come. So, and I think for the sake of time, I'll skip past, but as you can see, I just put together examples of some other wonderful poetry that's on the blockchain in different places, including people like Lawrence Fuller, who does a lot of collaborations with artists. There's a Web3 writing community. Actually, this is a little piece from Greg Younger's, is it a Substack or a Mirror? He does a newsletter on writing in Web3, so that's actually a good resource as well for anyone who's interested. And then, okay, as a way to just wrap this up before we get into our demo, I think the last thing I would say just in general about why I, as a poet, am so excited about all of this and all the possibilities that are in store for us is the fact that poetry and technology and poetry and blockchain actually have a lot in common. And Raina really hinted at this in her presentation, but to me, poetry is not just some enigmatic art form. It's actually a technology. It's a data storage technology that we invented before we had written language, so that we could encode information and transmit it from person to person and through space and time. So to me, for us as poets to be engaging with technology in all of these ways, even though it may seem a little counterintuitive, I think it's right at home with what the poet's mission has been, through thousands of years, which is to create these powerful moments that are little vessels of emotion and information and storytelling that we can pass to people that, that we hope will take them into the future. So that's why I think poetry is the original blockchain. Okay, so if we have time, I was thinking we could just do 10 or 15 minutes maybe of some interactive AI writing. And if you want to jump in and do any of this, feel free. But just to kind of set the tone for this, I wanted to share two of my favorite quotes. And again, I think it's been really funny, again, as a poet, telling people that I work with AI and that I'm involved in technology, because most people think of poetry as being a very emotional, very sort of anti-technological art form. We often think that poetry is very much about raw emotion, and technology is very sterile and machinic and formulaic. But actually, there are lots of poets who've recognized for a long time now that poetry is a kind of code. So Paul Valéry wrote, "A poem is really a kind of machine for producing the poetic state of mind by means of words." And that was, many years ago now. And William Carlos Williams said, "A poem is a small or large machine made out of words." So again, what we're doing here, playing with technology and language, is kind of carrying the torch for a lot of poets who've realized that there is an affinity between what programmers do, what codes do, what machines do, and what poets do, which is to really consolidate and make information really compact and transmittable. Okay, what I thought we could do quickly, there's 3 tools that I wanted to maybe linger on and just share, and I don't know who has familiarity with what, but a really good place to start for anyone who's interested in creative writing with AI is a tool called Sudowrite, Sudowrite. And Sudowrite is actually the Verse versus Tech partner from launch. We've been working with them for some time now. And they're a creative writing tool, an interface that is rooted in GPT and OpenAI's API. So they're using a lot of the technologies that we're getting familiar with through ChatGPT, but they make it really, really user-friendly. So if I can actually go back to the homepage, it's not just for poetry. It is So you can see here, it's a creative writing tool that you can kind of plug into and use for lots of different creative and nonfiction and I guess less creative endeavors as well if you want, but there's lots of tools you can use in terms of using it to brainstorm and like kind of revise things and create plot descriptions and enhance characterization and all that kind of stuff. But what I'm really interested in here and what we've brought to the Verse is this poem feature, which is still really unique in a lot of the AI landscape because it's a poem generator that is trained not only on canonical literature, it's actually trained on contemporary poetry. It's trained on poems and poets that no other language model that I know of is really that interested in. So it writes real poems in free verse. And if you, if you've had a chance to experiment with ChatGPT and you've asked it to write poems, you'll probably have found that it often writes a very stilted, very mechanical kind of poem. So this is a really good tool that actually writes the way a lot of contemporary poets write. So just to kind of illustrate what it can do, you can see here it's a really simple interface where you just type in a topic, a title, and then you put in some seed lines. So I can use maybe I have some examples here that we can use as a starting point, but I also kind of wanted to see if you guys want to come up with a topic and some seed lines and a title. We can also like write one together, but just to kind of get the ball rolling, I'm gonna plug in these lines of poetry from my book. I'm going to put as the topic generative growth, and I'm going to make the title a blank garden. Okay, so those are the basics, right? So then let's let the AI do its thing.
It was 5 lines, or was there a character limit? Sorry.
Oh, it's 5 lines.
5 lines.
Yeah, just a line limit. So it takes a second, but it'll generate its response.
Does it generate? Sorry, ask you a question. We're about to see it.
No, you can ask.
Does it just generate one, but can you like prompt it to create more?
Mm-hmm. You can go back and just regenerate over and over again, so you can kind of see all the different ways that it answers and rewrites it. But so you can see here, it's taken that original prompt and it's finished the poem on its own. So a blank garden is a promise to the future, biding its time, waiting for everything in it to catch up, saving strength over winter, all the unborn colors underground. So that's the original human part of the poem. When the warm weather comes, each plant will rise in its own time. A blank garden is a promise of time. It is the pause that's not a break in our work, the space between 2 points on a line or lines. A blank garden takes all seasons equally seriously and looks forward to the time when it'll be full. So it's it's a pretty good poem for a machine.
Last 2 lines, it's pretty neat.
So I want to write one together quickly, but I also just want to show the difference between using a tool like Pseudowrite that is trained on contemporary poetry and, for example, asking ChatGPT, like if you went here and you said, please complete, the following poem. Let's just see. Sorry, I didn't put a space in, but let's see what it does. So this is just really kind of indicative of the way that ChatGPT writes poems, which is like very kind of stilted and formulaic with rhyming structure. A blank garden, an artist's pristine canvas, a sanctuary where nature's palette dances, whispering secrets, untold stories it holds, awaiting life's touch as tales slowly unfold. So it's not as good. So you can kind of see the difference there. And then the last, sorry? This one was, I think I had it on 3.5. Yeah. Do you want to see what it does with 4? Does everyone, have you read enough of this? You see what I mean, right? It's like not that good. So then one other quick just comparison that I want to show. So this is in the playground. So this is actually the way that I started using it originally was to go into this playground area of OpenAI and create my training data set, upload it, and then I can go in and choose from all my custom generators on the side. So let me just take the most recent one that I've done. This won't necessarily like write a complete poem, but it's at least like informed by my own writing a little bit, so it should be a different response or a different completion. So at least like this isn't rhyming. All the unborn colors underground, they're hung up to dry like afternoons, like minutes of fresh water ready to bloom at any minute. Now a picture speaks for an instant, take a wire with a hook. So it's like definitely doing some weird, unexpected things with language, but at least it's not doing the stilted kind of formulaic thing that ChatGPT was doing. So I just wanted to show again how you can take the exact same prompt and like put it in these different interfaces and have very different things happen. So when people say, you know, it's just about like taking a prompt and the prompt is everything, it's not actually just the prompt. It's like the tool, it's the parameters you're using, it's the way you've trained the tool. There's lots of variables. And to Raina's point, you can actually change on the side here. You can change the length of the response. You can change lots of variables. You can make it more or less surprising. You can make it more or less sort of grammatically legible. So there's lots of things you can change here. So that's just a quick sort of, you know, quick and dirty comparison between those. So I have 2 thoughts on exercises, and maybe we can do both really quickly, but I was thinking if we could all collaborate on coming up with the prompts for this, then we can see a few different poems, right, in real time. So let me erase this. And then we need volunteers. Yeah. Do you want to do the topic? Or do you want to?
Sure.
Do you want to decide? Okay, who has a topic? Maybe we'll do the topic last. That's the hardest part. Okay, title, just throw out like any random title. It can be the title of a poem you already know, or it could just be a word. Okay, I'm gonna take a line from right there. Hydrating hope with firm hands. And then, let's see, I'm gonna take Hail to the Healers, Relief by Your Light. I'm just pulling this off the wall. And then I'm gonna call this Glimmers of Gratitude, because that's the title of Elizabeth's series. Okay, let's see what it does with just the 2 lines. But like the reason why we've been using pseudo-write, you can probably see like it's dead simple. You don't have to do anything, you just, I mean, the hardest part, like we all just said, because there was a big silence when I said, does anyone have a topic? Like that's the hardest part, is coming up with the prompts. But then the system's really well trained to actually create the poem. So this is a good place to start, to get your feet wet and to kind of understand the variability. Like if we you know, generate this again, you can see that was the previous iteration. Nature's elixirs, green and black tea, sea salt, honey sweetened matcha. Okay, so it's picking up hydration and kind of running with that theme. But you can kind of regenerate and see what else comes out. Okay. Okay, that's a short, simple one.